In a world where true faith seems increasingly rare, the story of Enoch shines like a beacon of spirituality and intimacy with the Creator. He was not a prophet known for great public deeds, nor a famous warrior. He was an ordinary man, but with such a deep connection to God that he transcended the boundaries of human existence. His life was marked by a constant walk with the Lord, so intense, so pure, that heaven itself bent down to receive him. Enoch is remembered as the man who did not experience death. He was taken by God directly to heaven, becoming one of the greatest mysteries in the Bible and one of the most inspiring figures in Scripture. His quiet yet profoundly spiritual journey echoes through generations as a call to those who desire to live a true, intense, and transformative faith. Today, we will dive into this sacred narrative that still resonates with those seeking an intimate relationship with God. In the beginning, the world was still a young land, newly awakened under the light of creation, pulsing with the divine presence that still echoed in the heart of humanity. The first generations, direct descendants of Adam and Eve, carried the living memory of Eden, the remembrance of a time when man walked with God without barriers. There was a unique spiritual closeness, a thread not yet fully severed between heaven and earth. But as the days went by, something began to change. Humanity gradually distanced itself from the essence of the one who had created them. Cities grew, men multiplied, and with them, vanity, ambition, and rebellion also increased. Corruption, like a silent shadow, began to spread. Violence became part of daily life. These were difficult times, days of growing spiritual darkness, when few still remembered the God who had formed man from the dust of the earth. And it was precisely in this era, marked by a striking contrast between the splendor of creation and the decay of the human heart, that Enoch came into the world. Born from the lineage of Seth, Adam's third son, Enoch bore not only the inheritance of the fall in his veins but also the sacred echo of a generation that had known the direct touch of the Creator. While many around him were lost in life's distractions, surrendering to the vanity and violence that grew like weeds, Enoch seemed to walk a different path. There was something different about him. Since childhood, his eyes reflected a unique curiosity, a search for deeper answers, for truths beyond the visible. It was as if his soul remembered something ancient and holy, a silent calling that set him apart from others. As the years went by, Enoch's presence began to draw attention. His fame spread by word of mouth, not for material achievements or acts of war, but for something much rarer, the way he lived. It was as if Enoch carried within himself a spark that other men had lost, a living reminder of the divine essence that had once burned intensely in the hearts of his lineage. His way of life both unsettled and inspired. While many surrendered to the darkness of the world, he walked in the opposite direction, guided by a spiritual hunger that seemed to grow each day. That thirst for something greater, something eternal, was like a constant whisper in the depths of his soul. A calling. He did not yet understand what awaited him, but he knew with absolute certainty that his destiny lay far beyond what his eyes could see. As time went on, Enoch stood out more and more among the men of his generation. At first glance, he seemed like any other man. He faced daily challenges, worked, cared for his family, but there was something in his presence that could not be ignored. His demeanor was serene, his gaze penetrating, and his silence carried a wisdom that unsettled those around him. While many sought satisfaction in the fleeting distractions of everyday life, Enoch seemed to live on a different frequency, as if he inhabited a parallel reality, invisible to most. He perceived the world with depth, as someone who not only sees what is before the eyes, but also what is hidden between the lines of existence. It was as if he saw beneath the surface, layers that escaped the hurried and distracted gaze of humanity. To Enoch, the beauty of nature and the mystery of the heavens were not just the backdrop of life. They were signs, silent messages from a divine presence that permeated all things. Every sunset, every star in the sky, every whisper of the wind among the trees seemed to reveal something sacred. To him, everything around him spoke of God. Though an ordinary man, Enoch carried within him a burning thirst, a hunger for something eternal, pure, and unknown. It was like a silent fire that never went out, consuming him with the desire to know the one who was beyond the visible. Deep down, he knew the world was more than what the eyes could perceive. He knew there was a creator behind it all, someone waiting to be found. And it was in the silence of starry nights or beneath the shadows of trees at dusk that Enoch would retreat to meditate. There, in communion with the invisible, he sought answers that only the soul could hear. He felt that something was calling him, a silent pull toward a communion that no one around him could understand. Others saw him as eccentric, perhaps even distant, lost in his own thoughts. Little did they know that with each step, Enoch was being led by an invisible force that was beginning to fill his soul and shape his destiny in a supernatural way. This calling was subtle but deep. It grew in silence, like a divine whisper that, day after day, became impossible to ignore. Until, on one of those quiet nights, when the sky was clear and the stars seemed closer to the earth, something different happened. Enoch, immersed in thoughts and prayers, felt a presence so intense that the very air seemed to vibrate around him. It was as if heaven had descended to earth, as if God, in his glory, was there beside him. That moment was not ordinary. It was an encounter, a glimpse of eternity. There was a voice, not audible to human ears, but intensely clear within his heart. A whisper that used no words, yet spoke with the full force of eternity. It was a direct call from the Creator. Something deep was drawing him in, awakening an inner certainty. God was seeking him. God wanted to be closer. Enoch had never felt anything like it. It was as if every cell in his body was being pulled toward an eternal purpose, a mission still hidden, but inevitable. That presence filled him with both peace and awe, as if he had touched something sacred and alive. From that day on, Enoch's life was never the same. He understood that he had been marked for a greater destiny. And so, without looking back, he began to walk a different path, a solitary path, but one deeply filled with the presence of God. He realized he could no longer live as before, distracted by the fleeting things of the world, submerged in the ordinary routine. The call he had heard, that soft but firm voice, invited him to a higher path, a journey of surrender and devotion. It was not an easy choice. He knew that this walk would take him away from the comfort and familiarity of a common life. But Enoch was determined. He felt in his spirit that this journey was greater than himself, greater than anything he had ever known. And so, in silence, he began to walk this new path, a path of consecration, of continuous communion, of thirst for the presence of the Most High. Day after day, he sought to live not for himself, but under the gaze of God. And with every step, he felt closer to unraveling the mystery that was calling him. The people around him may not have understood his transformation, his new way of life, his quietness, and his eyes always turned toward heaven. But Enoch knew, deep within his soul, that he was exactly where he needed to be. The sense that something great was approaching, silent, yet inevitable, burned like a constant spark in his soul. It was as if heaven was simply waiting for his heart to be fully ready. Enoch kept walking forward, with an attentive spirit and a willing heart, not knowing that his journey would lead him to experiences and revelations beyond human understanding. From that moment on, Enoch lived as a transformed man. His walk with God was no longer just a belief or tradition. It became a living, intimate relationship that shaped every choice and guided every step. While the men around him were lost in their pursuit of achievements, wealth, and fleeting pleasures, Enoch walked in a different direction, a path lonely in the eyes of the world, but filled with purpose before God. He walked with God, and that was his greatest achievement, his true treasure. While many sought meaning in the things of the earth, Enoch found fulfillment in silent communion with the Creator. This walk with God was not free of challenges, but it was full of purpose. There were days when Enoch felt as if he were walking against strong winds, facing silent trials in which his faith was tested by the pressures and pains of daily life. Even so, his soul remained firm. Nothing made him retreat. He was completely certain that he was on the right path, a narrow road, but illuminated by the divine presence. And every time doubt threatened to approach, the presence of God revealed itself, not with thunder or visible signs, but with a subtle and powerful touch, like a breath of eternity that renewed his strength and warmed his heart with peace. It was in that rhythm between faith and daily trials that Enoch was shaped. He became a living reflection of devotion, someone who chose the Creator above all else, even when everything around pointed in the opposite direction. Amid a generation plunged into violence and chaos, Enoch was like an oasis of serenity. Wherever he went, he left behind a trail of light, as if his soul reflected something of heaven. Some looked at him with suspicion, others with curiosity, but no one remained indifferent to his presence. He did not seek glory or recognition. He did not long for the praise of men. His only desire was to live in complete harmony with God, and that was enough. With each passing day, that communion became more intimate, more alive, as if his feet no longer touched the ground, but followed an invisible path guided by eternity. Enoch hardly noticed, but his life was no longer merely human. It was being shaped by something sacred. Around him, few could understand. It was as if he lived between two worlds, his feet on the earth, but his heart in heaven. And without knowing it, he was drawing near to a destiny that would mark human history. With every new dawn, his connection with God grew more intense, deeper. It was no longer just about prayer. Enoch conversed with the Creator. It was a living, constant relationship that filled every space of his being. He felt God's presence in the details, in the whisper of the wind through the leaves, in the silent glow of the stars, in the calm rhythm of the days. It was as if the entire universe responded to him, confirming that he was on the right path, a path where the invisible became more real than anything the eyes could see. The world was no longer just a physical stage for Enoch, it was a living tapestry of divine presence. Every mountain, every river, every breath of wind seemed to carry the echo of the Creator. And with that growing intimacy, Enoch began to see beyond the visible veil. His spiritual eyes were opened, and he began to perceive dimensions that escaped common understanding. It was as if God himself entrusted him with secrets hidden since the foundation of the world, revelations about good and evil, about the purpose of creation, about the unfathomable mysteries of heaven. Enoch became a silent guardian of truths that could not be spoken, yet profoundly shaped his heart. And even in the face of such great wisdom, he remained humble. He sought no titles, no influence. The greatness of his visions did not swell his ego, it only deepened his reverence and obedience. To others, Enoch was a mystery. Some admired him in silence, others regarded him with unease. But no one could explain what made him so different. He, however, did not concern himself with glances or judgments. He knew his mission was greater than human understanding. And so, he continued on his path, faithful to the calling that pulsed in the deepest part of his being. While the world around him sank into chaos, Enoch walked an invisible path, a trail of peace amidst disorder. It was as if he dwelled in a parallel reality, where spiritual harmony prevailed over the noise of a corrupted humanity. His soul vibrated in tune with a heavenly frequency few could perceive, a gentle, sacred melody that wrapped around him like an invisible cloak and shaped him day by day. Enoch felt deep within that his life carried an uncommon purpose, a calling that could not be ignored. He did not know exactly what awaited him at the end of that journey, but that didn't matter. With every sunrise, he surrendered more deeply to the presence of God, feeling the divine touch in every detail of daily life. This communion was so intense, so tangible, that at times it seemed heaven itself bent over him. The connection between Enoch and the Creator was not merely spiritual. It was living, growing, and transforming. And without realizing it, he was being led, step by step, toward a sacred destiny, a mystery that began to reveal itself not with words, but through experiences that transcended all human explanation. Over time, Enoch's life became more than a spiritual curiosity. It became a powerful, silent testimony of God's presence among men. Enoch didn't need eloquent speeches or grand signs. His very existence was a living message, as if every gesture, every choice, every silence carried the essence of the divine. Those who watched him closely noticed something different, not just in his behavior, but in the atmosphere. Enoch's presence seemed to alter the environment around him. There was a serene peace that surrounded everything when he was near, as if heaven breathed through him. People could feel it, even if they didn't understand. His simplicity carried spiritual weight, and his stillness provoked reflection. It was as if, amid the world's confusion, Enoch was an open window to the eternal. Many who encountered him left changed, not because he persuaded them with words, but because his life awakened a question that echoed in the heart: is it really possible to live that close to God? Some looked at Enoch with admiration. He was a living inspiration, a silent proof that it was possible to remain upright in a world sinking into corruption. His life was a reminder that hope still remained, that communion with God was not merely a distant memory from Eden, but a living reality. Others, however, viewed him with suspicion. There was something unsettling in his serenity. How could someone live with such peace while the world collapsed around him? It was as if Enoch's tranquility exposed the inner emptiness of those who watched him. Some even feared his presence, as if it were a mirror reflecting how far they had drifted from God. But Enoch did not seek to please men. He did not walk to be understood. His only pursuit was to draw nearer, day by day, to the heart of the Creator. What he perhaps did not realize was that, amid the growing darkness, his life shone like a beacon, a silent, steady light, discreetly guiding those still yearning for a true path. Even those who did not understand or accept his faith were somehow touched by it. There was something about Enoch that transcended explanation, a light that silently exposed truths many tried to ignore. It was impossible to remain indifferent in his presence. It was as if, upon seeing him, people were reminded of something they had forgotten, that God was still near and still calling. Enoch did not distance himself from people, but he also did not conform to the world's standards. He was one among many, yet he lived as if he belonged to another kingdom. His unwavering faith made him a living bridge between heaven and earth, between what is seen and what is eternal. And with each new dawn, that connection to the divine grew stronger. It was as if an invisible flame burned within him, lighting everything around with a glow that could not be contained. A light that was not his, but from the one he walked with. Time passed, and Enoch continued walking with God, faithful in every detail, firm in his faith and conviction. Each day was lived with purpose, each thought captive to the will of the Creator. Deep down, he knew there was a plan in it all, something far beyond what his eyes could see or his mind could grasp. Even without full answers, Enoch felt in his spirit that the end of his earthly journey was near. But it would not be a common end, it would be the beginning of something eternal. A destiny reserved only for those who dare to walk so closely with God that heaven itself opens to receive them. And then, one day, the impossible happened. Enoch was no longer found among men. He had been taken. He did not taste death. He did not pass through the valley of separation. He simply ascended. He was taken by the divine presence, enveloped by the glory of the Most High, and welcomed into the eternal kingdom as a beloved son. And one day, amid his reflections, Enoch began to feel something different in his heart. It was as if a deep vision was being revealed to him, a glimpse of what was to come. He did not merely walk with God, he began to realize that this journey was leading him to places few could ever reach. His inner eyes were opened, and the veil of time was gently lifted before him. In his silent communion, Enoch began to see beyond the present. He saw images of a distant future, visions filled with mysteries, revelations, and warnings. It was as if the Creator himself was showing him the path humanity would take, a road of rebellion, corruption, and forgetfulness of the truth. He saw God's justice preparing like a distant storm, a judgment that would come with power, cleansing the earth of iniquity. These visions did not fill him with fear, but with reverence. They were a clear reminder that God not only walks with men but reigns over them in justice and holiness. And through it all, Enoch remained steadfast. His visions only strengthened his faith. He knew that even when evil seemed to prevail, the truth and justice of God would always endure. These visions were not easy to bear. They came with a weight, a responsibility Enoch had never known before. His heart, once filled with peace, now also carried the burden of knowledge. He saw men increasingly surrendering to wickedness, pride taking over their hearts, love being traded for greed, and injustice spreading like a dark shadow that smothered the light of truth. It was as if the world was slowly walking away from the Creator. Enoch now understood that he was not only walking with God, He had been called to announce what human eyes could not see, the future. Amid these revelations, God showed him that he would not overlook evil forever. Divine silence was not forgetfulness, it was patience. But there would come a day when the Creator would judge the earth, bringing justice and balance, separating the righteous from the wicked, and restoring the order that had been corrupted. Enoch, overwhelmed by awe and reverence, knew these truths could not remain silent forever. His life was now more than a personal journey, it was a warning, an echo from heaven about what was to come. Enoch felt the need to speak, to warn those around him, even if many would laugh or ignore him. He knew the truth is often uncomfortable, but he could not remain silent. Moved by the visions and divine urgency, Enoch began to share what he had seen. His words were not ordinary. They were strong, full of authority, like thunder in a clear sky. He spoke of the judgment to come, of the need for repentance, of God's mercy and the justice that would soon be revealed. He cried out to hardened hearts to return to the Creator while there was still time. Though many remained indifferent, others listened with touched hearts. They felt that those words did not come merely from a man, but from someone who truly knew the voice of God. Enoch did not seek fame or followers. His only desire was to fulfill the purpose for which he had been called. And even in the face of rejection, he remained steadfast, a messenger of light in the midst of darkness. The path he walked drew him ever closer to the Creator, and with each revelation, he no longer seemed to fully belong to this world. It was as if Enoch's feet still touched the ground, but his soul already dwelled in the heavenly realms. Time, for him, no longer passed as it did for others. Each day became an eternity in communion with God, and every step was a silent preparation for what was to come. Enoch no longer fit among men. His gaze carried the glow of one who sees the invisible. His voice held the weight of one who hears the eternal. He was being transformed, not outwardly, but inwardly, shaped by a divine presence that consumed him entirely. And then, on a day that began like any other, the extraordinary happened. Scripture simply says, Enoch walked with God, and he was no more, because God took him. No pain, no warning, no death. God took him. Anakdoflov, a reward for a life of unshakable faith. Enoch disappeared from the earth, but his story echoes to this day as a living prophecy of what happens when someone chooses to walk with God. Truly, his spirit lived in such deep communion with the Creator that the line between heaven and earth began to fade. Enoch walked with God, not merely as a poetic metaphor, but as a tangible and continuous reality. Genesis 5 verse 24. It was as if each of his steps echoed into eternity, as if his life was tuned to heaven's rhythm. Those around him sensed something unique. In Enoch, there was a serenity that transcended earthly concerns, a presence that could not be explained with words alone. It was as if he was constantly wrapped in a soft light, not visible to ordinary eyes, but felt by those who came near. A peace that surpassed all understanding, Philippians 4 verse 7, lived in him, and no turmoil or injustice of this world could touch him. Enoch did not turn away from his responsibilities. He continued to guide his family, to teach through his life and words, and to warn of the coming judgment, as Jude 1 verses 14 to 15 reminds us. But there was a light in his eyes that seemed to look beyond the mountains and horizons. He saw what human eyes could not see, Hebrews 11 verse 5. His heart was anchored in heavenly realities. Each day, his soul grew closer to the eternal, until one day, God took him, and he was seen no more among men. And then, on a seemingly ordinary day, without warning or spectacle, Enoch was simply no longer seen. He had been taken by God, Genesis 5 verse 24. He did not experience death like other men. He did not pass through the painful separation that marks the end of earthly life. His journey of faith had reached its unique completion. He was brought into the presence of the Creator, as a precious reward for a life wholly devoted to the divine. For before he was taken, he was commended as one who pleased God, Hebrews 11 verse 5. His absence caused wonder and confusion. His family and friends likely searched for him, perhaps called out or scoured the area. But those who truly knew him understood deep down that this was not a tragedy, nor a sudden end. It was the silent fulfillment of a promise. Enoch had remained faithful to the very last moment, walking with God not only in peaceful days but also through times of corruption and violence, as was the state of humanity in his time. Jude 1 verses 14 to 15. And God, in his unchanging faithfulness, took him to himself. It was as if the Lord said, "Enoch, you've come far enough with me. Now come finish the journey at home." A foreshadowing of what Jesus would later say, "Well done, good and faithful servant. Enter into the joy of your Lord." Matthew 25 verse 21. Enoch's life thus became an eternal reminder that God is a rewarder of those who diligently seek him. Hebrews 11 verse 6. His story did not vanish with his absence. On the contrary, it remained alive in the memory of his children, his grandchildren, and all generations to come. Enoch became an eternal symbol of the real and concrete possibility of living a life so intimate and aligned with God that even death held no power over it. His life echoed the truth that Jesus would later affirm, "He who hears my word and believes in him who sent me has everlasting life, and shall not come into judgment, but is passed from death into life." John 5 verse 24. Enoch never seemed to fully belong to this world. It was as if his soul dwelled in a space between heaven and earth, suspended in a communion that transcended the limits of flesh. A reality no one around him could fully comprehend, but one they all could somehow feel. His life quietly pointed to eternity, a reminder that humankind was created, from the very beginning, to walk with God in the cool of the day. Genesis 3 verse 8. The testimony of Enoch has crossed centuries, inspiring prophets, apostles, and believers of all ages. He remains a living proof that it is indeed possible to live in this world without being conformed to it. Romans 12 verse 2. Cultivating a communion with God that transforms one's very existence and opens the gates of eternity. While other men dealt with their struggles, passions, and anxieties, consumed by the worries of life and the challenges of a corrupted world, Enoch walked in silence. Not an empty silence, but one filled with meaning, wrapped in a peace that surpasses all understanding. Philippians 4 verse 7. His relationship with God had reached such a deep and intimate level that, often, he seemed absent to those who observed him. It was as if his mind and spirit moved in another dimension, not physical, but spiritual, tuned to the presence of the Most High. Enoch lived on an invisible frequency, in constant harmony with heaven. He was connected to something, or rather, to someone, who was as real to him as the very ground beneath his feet. As David would declare centuries later, "I have set the Lord always before me, because he is at my right hand, I shall not be moved." Psalm 16 verse 8. Words were no longer necessary to communicate with God. His communion had transcended the level of speech and formality. A thought, a sigh, a movement of the heart was enough, and Enoch perceived the divine response, subtle yet powerful. Just as the Apostle Paul would later teach that the Spirit himself intercedes for us with groanings too deep for words, Romans 8 verse 26, Enoch experienced that reality in his daily walk. His life had become a continuous prayer, a constant dialogue with the Creator, where God's presence was clearer than any human sound or word. It was a connection that, little by little, drew him away from the limitations of the physical world and toward something eternal, unchanging, and perfect. His soul was becoming less rooted in passing things and more firmly anchored in heavenly realities. As the Apostle Paul would later write, "What is seen is temporary, but what is unseen is eternal." 2 Corinthians 4 verse 18. Enoch was already living that truth in its fullness. This spiritual intensity did not go unnoticed. Those who lived with him felt, though they did not fully understand, that there was something unusual about his life. They saw in Enoch a serene light, not a physical glow, but a radiance of peace, of certainty, of holiness. It was a calm that inspired and, at the same time, unsettled, that drew others in and provoked reflection. He was a living mystery, a man who walked the earth, yet whose spirit already seemed to dwell in the heavens. Hebrews 11 verse 5. Day after day, Enoch felt that something greater was drawing near. There was a silent, yet irresistible calling, stronger than time and space itself. He was like Abraham, who later was looking forward to the city with foundations, whose architect and builder is God. Hebrews 11 verse 10. Enoch sensed in his heart that a glorious destiny awaited him, a destiny beyond all human comprehension or earthly expectation. Heaven was growing nearer with every step, and the divine invitation to cross the veil of eternity was becoming clearer, more real. Then, something happened that no one could explain. On an apparently ordinary day, in the midst of his quiet routine of seeking God, Enoch simply vanished. There were no farewells, no prior signs, just the sudden and absolute absence of his presence. Those around him, family, friends, neighbors, soon realized that something extraordinary had occurred. Restless and alarmed, they began to search for him urgently. They combed every place he might have gone. They called his name again and again, their voices echoing through the trails, the fields, and the caves where he used to walk. They went to the places where he used to pray and meditate, but it was as if he had dissolved into the air, as if the very veil between the visible and the invisible had suddenly closed. There were no traces, no signs of struggle or accident, only silence, and the unsettling certainty that Enoch was no longer among them. As Genesis 5 verse 24 declares simply and powerfully, Enoch walked with God, and he was not, for God took him. The invisible had become visible only to him, and the eternal had embraced him for good. Those who knew the depth of his spiritual life understood, deep within, Enoch had not been lost. He had been found by God, called home to a place human eyes could not yet behold.
There was no trail, no clue, only the silent emptiness where Enoch once walked and lived.
That singular man, whose presence radiated a quiet and profound peace, was now missed in a nearly tangible way. It was as if the very air had changed, as if, with his departure, a part of the divine presence he carried had departed as well. The news spread quickly. In no time, the story of his disappearance was told from mouth to mouth, shared with awe and wonder. Some, especially those who knew his devotion and intimacy with God, did not hesitate to believe that he had been taken by the Creator himself. They remembered his words, his prophetic warnings, Jude 1 verses 14 to 15, his unshakable faith. To them, it made sense that God, in his sovereignty and grace, would take Enoch to himself, as a visible sign of the reward reserved for those who diligently seek him, Hebrews 11 verse 6. Others, however, remained perplexed. They tried to find a practical, rational, tangible explanation. Perhaps an accident.
An animal attack?
Maybe he had simply wandered off and gotten lost? But no matter how much they searched, investigated, or speculated, there was no explanation that could calm their restless hearts. The fact was simple and undeniable. Enoch was no longer among them. And that reality, no matter how mysterious, was final. As Scripture declares with disarming clarity, God took him, Genesis 5 verse 24. To those who truly knew him, his absence, though disconcerting, made sense in a strange way. It was as if his entire life had been a quiet foreshadowing of this moment. As if, from the beginning, Enoch had walked with one foot already in eternity. He had always been different, not due to eccentricity or social detachment, but because of a serene holiness, like someone who already belonged to another reality, Hebrews 11 verse 5. Perhaps, some thought with reverence, God had truly taken him. Those who had witnessed his living faith, his profound peace, and the way his life reflected heavenly values could conceive of no other plausible explanation. It was as if God had simply shortened the journey and led him directly to the eternal home his soul so deeply longed for. And so, Enoch became more than a memory. He became a living legend, a sacred mystery, a prophetic sign of what God reserves for those who please him. A man who did not taste death, but in the blink of an eye, vanished like the wind, leaving behind only the reverent silence of a destiny no one would fully comprehend this side of eternity. 1 Corinthians 2 verse 9. His life remains an eternal reminder that there truly is a higher reality beyond what we see, and that walking with God is not merely a beautiful metaphor, but a possible, transformative, and rewarding experience. Enoch was the living proof of the promise that would echo centuries later in the words of Jesus. Truly, truly, I say to you, if anyone keeps my word, he will never see death. John 8 verse 51. The disappearance of Enoch carried with it a mystery that deeply touched the souls of those around him. Stories about him began to be told with an almost sacred tone, as if they were distant echoes of something divine and eternal. They were not mere memories of a devout man, they were testimonies of a real encounter between the temporal and the eternal. People said, with growing conviction, that God had taken him because his life on earth could no longer contain such closeness to heaven. His heart already beat to the rhythm of eternity, and his communion with God had surpassed the boundaries of time and space. As the letter to the Hebrews affirms, before he was taken, Enoch was commended as one who pleased God, Hebrews 11 verse 5. Enoch became more than a historical figure. He became a living and eternal sign that when we walk with God with a pure heart and an upright life, it is possible to transcend the very limits of human destiny. His life still declares that the highest purpose of man is not simply to live and die, but to walk with the Creator until He Himself calls us home. His story invites us to reflect. Have we been walking with God with such intensity? Enoch shows us that the true reward is not merely long life or earthly blessings, it is the very presence of God. And one day, like Enoch, we too will be called to cross the veil of eternity. May we be ready. The absence of Enoch left people in a deep silence, a silence that reflected the impact of his departure. It was as if his presence had dissolved, leaving behind a void that invited reflection. Many saw his absence as a powerful metaphor, a reminder that walking with God can be so deep, so intimate, that it surpasses the boundaries of ordinary life. Enoch had transcended human limitations, not by his own strength, but through his continuous communion with the Creator. Others, in their search for answers, looked to the heavens. Where was the man who once walked among them and now seemed to dwell among the stars, in a place that only God could reveal? Their hearts were restless, trying to understand the mystery of his departure. But deep down, many knew that Enoch was now where he had always longed to be, in the presence of God. Those who had the privilege of knowing Enoch in life never forgot him. They remembered every detail, the serene gaze that radiated peace, the wise words that illuminated the path, the tranquility he carried, as if he didn't belong to this world. His life was like an open book, a living letter of faith and surrender. His story was passed down from generation to generation, like a precious secret held in the hearts of those who knew him. And over time, the legend of Enoch became a beacon of hope, a reminder that it is possible to live in such intimacy with God that even death loses its power. Little by little, Enoch became not just a man of faith, but a bridge between the visible and the invisible world, a constant reminder that there is more to life than what the eyes can see. His story was not just a distant memory, but a living presence that challenged the limits of human understanding. He was no ordinary man, but a sign that the true spiritual journey transcends this world and touches the eternal. And as stories of his life spread, something new began to grow in the hearts of those who listened, a renewed hope. Enoch had left a legacy, not of riches or earthly glory, but of pure faith and a closeness with God that many now longed to follow. They understood that by walking with the Creator, extraordinary destinies were within reach, not by human merit, but by the divine grace Enoch had so deeply experienced. And that desire began to spread quietly, like a subtle and irresistible call that, day after day, awaited the next person bold enough to answer it. Enoch's example was there, available to all, like a shining light waiting for someone to follow, someone willing to walk in the same intimacy with God that he had lived. Over time, the story of Enoch would become more than legend, it would become a symbol of hope and mystery for all who heard it. He was not merely the man who vanished without a trace. He was the man who walked so deeply in God's presence that, one day, he simply crossed the line between heaven and earth. And the lesson he left for all of us was clear. True life is not about living for oneself, but walking with the Creator until one day, we too are taken to Him. For many, Enoch became proof that the Creator is not distant, but closer than they could ever imagine. He was the living example that walking with God is not an unattainable dream, but a real calling, a true invitation to a life that goes beyond human limitations and reaches into eternity. Enoch did not live just for this world. He walked, already, with his feet in heaven. Every detail of his story was told with reverence and awe. He was the man who walked with God, yet also walked among people, touching the lives of those around him. And yet, there was something different about him. He carried the radiance of the invisible, like a flame that illuminated wherever he went. His steps, his faith, his compassionate gaze upon the world, everything about him reflected the divine presence that accompanied him. His story became a beacon for those who sincerely longed to draw near to God. It wasn't about miraculous deeds or great human accomplishments, but about a simple life deeply connected with the Creator. In a way, Enoch was a living testimony that a life devoted to communion with God is a life that transcends death and touches eternity. Enoch had not been a perfect man, but he was a devoted one, someone who, with courage, chose God's path in a time when few shared the same determination. His life was not marked by public achievements or earthly wealth, but by silent faithfulness and a constant pursuit of the divine presence. He became an example for all who, despite their flaws, chose to walk with God. His life was an open letter, a story written in everyday actions and choices. And even after his departure, that letter continued to be read and reflected upon by generations. His journey of faith inspired those around him to follow the same path. The elders whispered his story on starry nights, while the wind carried the words that spoke of a life that had touched the divine. Young people, eyes shining with hope, listened to those stories and felt the same deep calling stirring in their own hearts. Enoch had lived with such devotion and love for God that he became eternal in the memory of his people. He became an invisible link, connecting them directly to the Creator. His life, though seemingly simple, was a testament that true greatness is not measured by visible achievements, but by the depth of faith and intimacy with God. And so, his story came to echo through the generations, not as a mere memory of the past, but as a living witness that by walking with God, we can touch the eternal. His life reminds us that even amid chaos and human limitations, there is a journey we can take, a journey that draws us closer to the Creator and, perhaps one day, allows us to become part of that sacred and infinite mystery. The story of Enoch, though ancient, remains alive. It has not faded with the passage of time, but continues as a gentle whisper echoing through the ages, bringing deep lessons to all who hear it with open hearts. What makes this journey so special is not just the fact that Enoch was taken by God without tasting death, but above all, the way he lived. He was not a perfect man, but a man with a surrendered heart, a heart that endlessly longed to be closer to the Creator. The greatness of his life does not lie in visible accomplishments or extraordinary deeds, but in the depth of his relationship with God. The true essence of Enoch's journey is found in constant faithfulness, in a relentless pursuit of deeper communion with heaven. Enoch shows us that walking with God is not about distance or something intangible, it's about choice and closeness. He teaches us that this walk is a continuous commitment, renewed with every step, every day, in every decision, no matter how small it may seem. True faith, as demonstrated by Enoch, is not loud or showy. It is quiet, profound, and reflected in the small choices we make moment by moment. Enoch did not live for recognition or glory. His greatest triumph was living with integrity before God, without seeking attention or admiration. He understood that true greatness is not found in outward achievements, but in inner faithfulness, in a deep relationship with the Creator. The simplicity with which he walked with God is a powerful reminder that, in the end, what defines us is not visible accomplishments or material possessions, but the quality of our communion with God. It is this communion that gives life its true meaning, far more than any great feat or worldly recognition. In every generation, there are those who hear the call to walk with God more intimately, a call that goes beyond shallow understanding. Enoch's story reminds us that this journey is not reserved for a few, but is a path accessible to all. He inspires us to seek that peace, that deep connection which transcends human comprehension and draws us closer to the sacred, lifting us beyond earthly limits. Perhaps, like Enoch, we will never fully understand what lies on the other side of this journey. The mystery of divine presence is vast, beyond our ability to comprehend. But Enoch showed us, simply and powerfully, that by choosing to walk with God, we connect with something greater than ourselves, something eternal, filled with beauty and mystery, something that transforms us from the inside out. This journey is not about understanding everything, but about trusting the process, trusting that with each step, we are being guided by a Creator who knows the path better than we do. And it is that trust that leads us to an intimacy that goes beyond the visible, touching us in ways that words cannot describe. If Enoch's story touched your heart, and you want to continue exploring other stories of faith and overcoming, Don't forget to like this video and share it with those you love. And of course, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any new content. Together, we'll uncover more powerful lessons from the Bible and discover how these ancient stories still speak into our lives today. Enoch's journey challenges us to look beyond the visible, to pursue a relationship with God that transforms not just our actions, but our very essence. He was not just a distant biblical figure, but a living example that it is possible to live so close to God that eternity begins to stir within us. May Enoch's story awaken in you the courage to walk by faith toward the eternal purpose for which you were created. And remember, whoever walks with God never walks alone, and perhaps, like Enoch, you too may touch eternity before expected. May your journey be marked by closeness with the Creator, and may He guide your every step.